Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Kathryn Thornton. Kathryn is an American scientist and a former NASA astronaut with 4 Space Shuttle missions and over 975 hours in space, including 21 hours of extravehicular activity. One of the shuttle missions was to the Hubble Space Telescope to service and repair. She's now Professor Emerita at the University of Virginia in the School of Engineering and Applied Science. Kathryn was inducted in the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame in 2010. She's the recipient of numerous awards, including NASA Space Flight Medals, the Explorers Club Lowell Thomas Award, and the National Intelligence Medal of Achievement. How do you get the National Intelligence Medal of Achievement, Kathryn? Welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And I can answer that question. At one time, before I was an astronaut, I worked for the U.S. Army as a civilian in an intelligence organization. So that's all I'm going to tell you.
So that was prior to the NASA career.
It was, but now that I think of it, I guess that came from my first mission being classified. That's when that medal happened.
Then we'll leave it classified. We won't go there.
Yeah, you're right. We won't.
Kathryn, wonderful to have you. You're one of the amazing people that I got the chance to meet at Starmus, this gathering of really interesting personalities. So it's always fun, these events, all the connections that you make. I think it really celebrates the human experience. So I'm grateful.
Me too. I was very happy to be there.
We had this moment of watching a concert from the castle, looking down, and we were there with Scott Hubbard and his wife.
And then we walked home from it.
And we did. Kathryn, as with all my other interviews, let's start with your 3 words that for you captures the essence of space.
Okay, I thought about this since you gave me a heads up. The first one I would say would be magical. The first time I let go of a pen and it didn't fall to the floor, I felt like I was in this Disney cartoonish magical environment. So I describe that environment as magical. I would say it's infinite. We can't find the edge of space, although we continue to look for it with Hubble and with James Webb. But it's out there. We can't find it. Maybe it's not out there. I don't know. And finally, unforgiving. You know, humans make laws and rules and regulations, and they can be changed, and you can argue with them, and you can interpret them. But the laws of physics and material science are what they are. You can't change it. You can argue all you want, but you're going to lose. So it's a very unforgiving environment.
Do you think that unforgiving is dependent of time and technology? I mean, if we can look at, do you think that the sailors of the 1500s, when they went on the ocean, they would describe the ocean as unforgiving because of the capacity that they had to manage it? Right now, space seems to be that place where, you know, it's much bigger. It's unforgiving to us. But if we go 300 years in the future, space will be more manageable and less risky?
I think the laws of physics will still be the laws of physics. And that's, governs how we get there. And I think the sailors would have said the same thing. I mean, the ocean is the ocean, and I won't say it doesn't care, but almost like it doesn't care. You abide by its rules, not the other way around. You can't argue with it.
That is definitely something. I mean, for me, my wilderness expeditions have always been an exercise of humility. I think you and I, we've talked about that. We have a certain control, but ultimately these forces are much bigger than us, and it's true, it doesn't care. Nature doesn't care whether you survive or not, whether it works or it doesn't work. It doesn't take a side. There's no moral to it. There's one force, and it has to move forward, it has to adapt, and we're the ones putting a moral judgment on it. But
right. Yeah, nature just is what it is.
It is what it is. Now, you're an engineer, and I want to know more.
Actually, I'm a physicist by training, although I taught in the engineering school. I'm a physicist.
So you're a physicist, so you understand the science of space, and being an astronaut, you understand the technology of space, and also with NASA, the politics of space. But what would be for you the human story of space?
I think it's just our next step. I think, we started out on land masses. I assume that's how we evolved, on land masses. And then oceans got in the way. And I imagine they were pretty daunting. But gradually, we learned to live and adapt to that, adapt ourselves and our technology to that environment. And I think space is just the next step, that we will adapt all of our technology to that environment, and it will just become another domain that we live and work in.
Do you think it's more, I mean, where do you sit in that debate of are we going to be planet based or more space orbit, like the Gerald O'Neill vision of these big space structures? Or is it going to be both?
That's kind of an interesting question. If I try to use my analog of the land masses in the oceans, we learned how to conquer the oceans and cross the oceans, but we don't live on oceans. Even this many centuries, decades, millennia later, we cross oceans, but we don't live there. So maybe space will be like that. We'll cross space and go somewhere and then live there. But as far as cities in space, I don't know.
I have this, I wrote this essay about my vision of how our traveling in space, how our evolution in space will follow a similar expansion on Earth, and where we followed the water. If you look at, where cities would be established and what we did, we always followed the water. In space, we thought for a long time that there was no water. Now we're discovering that water is everywhere. And it is what is fundamental for a lot of things that we need to do. So we will follow the water in space. And like you have these, when we talk about terraforming Mars, which I think would be a waste of energy personally, because I think that they're resource-rich planets. Like you have a New York and you have an LA, and in between you have a lot of smaller cities and settlements. So there'll be resource-rich planets that are out there, and in between you're gonna have all these little settlements that take us. What do you think?
Well, again, I go back to the analogy of the past. I'm not a historian, but maybe I wish I were. There's so much you can learn from that you can use to project the future. But a lot of the exploration on this continent was to get resources. The Europeans came to North America to get resources and take it back to Europe. So maybe for the next 500 years, we see mining operations on Mars or on asteroids or whatever, and then resources then come back to Earth or get used in space, not have to be lifted from the Earth. Maybe that's happens before we start to move people there, to colonize it, to set up a new home. I don't know. I do know that my imagination is way too limited to predict more than about next week.
No, but that was a conversation. That was a topic that you and I were really like bond on, is like learning from the past. And if you want to, like, it's true. I mean, Europe was a total mess back in the 15 and 1600s, and they went out looking for resources. Yeah, and then you had the kings and queens who were funding these expeditions, right? The billionaires at that time. They were looking for India, for spices, for food. Every single tree was cut in Europe, for ships and for battles and everything. So, and the rivers were polluted, and the aristocrat had everything in place. So there was no opportunities for a lot of people. And now, it gave the incentive for others to get on the ship and abandon everything so that, they could start better. Now, there's one thing that I remember you and I talking, which is quite different from a lot of other astronauts that I've talked to. Many look back when they're up there. They look back and they have this sense of looking at the planet that is extremely fragile, where life is hanging almost on this thread and just, on the verge of collapsing. You looked back and you had a different realization. What was it?
I saw the Earth. I tried to see the fragile blue Earth. I really did, because that's what I expected to see. But I saw a living, breathing, powerful Earth. You look at the energy tied up in the atmosphere of our planet. Anytime you look out the window on the dark side, you will see lightning somewhere. You look at the oceans and the place where the sun glints off the ocean, you can see that the water is churning, it's moving. And if you've ever been tumbled in the waves after a storm at the beach, you know that there's a lot of energy in our ocean. You look at the Himalayas, which are, a fender bender between the Indian subcontinent and Asia. Think of all that energy. We're the ones that are fragile. It's not the Earth. The Earth has gone through global warming, global cooling, ice ages, continents breaking apart, continents colliding again, cataclysmic asteroid collisions and supervolcano explosions without any help from us. It's gone through all that stuff. And now that we are contributing some to a very minor change in global temperatures, which is an existential threat to millions of people, the Earth's just going, yeah, whatever. I don't think it cares.
That's one of the things that you and I would agree is like it doesn't care, and that's one of the like I've always tried to shift that narrative, from it doesn't take away from what needs to be done from our from our end. Like there's an urgency to fix and to correct certain actions, but the incentive and the motivation should not be about saving the planet, right? The planet, whether we messed it up or we do it correctly, the planet will continue. Is it good? Is it bad? Where it depends where you sit in that equation, right? The life will be something else, and ultimately we'll be the ones to lose. The planet, it's going to take a couple thousand years, 10,000 years, and then it will be something else.
Yeah, and I think if we acknowledge our contribution to the problem and that that's human caused, then if humans caused it, humans can fix it. If we're trying to battle Mother Nature, we're going to lose. But we're battling ourselves, that we're the ones who created the problem and we ought to fix it. And the contributions to climate change are not equal across the globe. There's some of us that contribute more than other groups. Certainly the consequences of it are not equitably distributed. I mean, there's some island nations in the Pacific that aren't going to exist. Much of our, human-built environment is along coastlines that are going to be severely affected by this. But if we acknowledge that we created it, then we can fix it. And why don't we just get on with it? Let's do it.
But it's a bit more complicated because some actually will benefit. It's also a reality that is when you said that the impact is not going to be the same across the globe. Like you look at Russia and China are actually kind of looking forward because it's opening up the route, the Northeast Passage, where it's going to change a lot of things for them. So they're like, hey, we're going to benefit. And you can see where even agricultural, like places like Canada, the agricultural belt is like moving further north, and some of them like now are in benefit. So it's such a complex reality because the human species doesn't do well with concept, right? If you tell them, and I think that's been one of the challenges when the science community say, well, it's going up by 1 or 2 degrees, and people look out their window and they're like, well, my weather goes up by 10, 15 degrees every single day. How is it that it's such a big deal? But I think that what makes us great as a species is that when faced with the inevitable, this is usually when we wake up and we find action. What do you think about what needs to happen for us, for the human species? What is evolution? How does it work?
I can't explain evolution, although I guess, the more chances we have to mutate our genes, the more chances we have to get a good outcome of that. So maybe that's something. I understand that it benefits some people and disadvantages some significantly. We can, although we're not much good at this now, but we know how to live as a community and how to help everyone in our community. And it just depends on how you define that community, I think. Right now, that community may be my neighborhood here, and we have a neighborhood association, and we do things that I may not want to do, but for the good of the community, I do. And I think maybe we have to grow that larger community, and maybe being in space and seeing the Earth from space and working together in space can help grow that community beyond just 3 blocks from here.
It's definitely going to be interesting because the reality of up in space will certainly create a distinction, right, between the challenges and the needs and the reality that they have to face, whether it's on the moon or in low orbit or beyond, and what you have on Earth and the resources. I think the the TV show The Expanse was successful in expressing the complexity of those relationships, as opposed to Star Trek, where they were kind of different. But were you a Star Trek fan, or?
I did watch the early Star Treks, yeah.
I never had for me the spandex uniform was
Yeah, the short skirts, yeah.
Catherine, were you like from a young age, was that something with space kind of always the carrot that drove you to become an engineer, or what was your journey of becoming an astronaut?
Um, no, I mean, space was not an option for me. It never even occurred to me. So I was kind of as my friend Hank Hartsfield used to say, a sine wave in a cosine world. I was the first generation of my family to go to college. There are no scientists or engineers anywhere in my gene pool that I'm aware of. But I just liked it. I liked physics because it was a puzzle, and it wasn't the easiest subject. I wanted to work at it, but it was such a sense of accomplishment when you finally work something out. That's sort of what I did. So I stuck with that. Got my bachelor's degree and decided I didn't know enough to go out in the real world and pretend to be a physicist. So I got a master's and a PhD. And then finally they said, it's time for you to go out in the world and do stuff. I worked for the Army for a few years. And then I saw an announcement that NASA was selecting the next group of astronauts, which was the third group to include women. And it had the qualifications, physical qualifications, and it was just like normal, healthy people. You didn't have to be super strong or athletic. Advanced degree desired, I think it was. And so I had that. So I just applied thinking there wasn't a chance in a billion that I'd be selected. So it's kind of like, buying a lottery ticket and spending the day planning how you would spend the 100 million if you got it. It was about that level of, yeah, sure, it's going to happen. But astonishingly, they called me. So I went down to Houston and joined the astronaut corps. I knew like nothing. I was completely naive. I was pretty sure the pointy end of the shuttle went up, and that was about the limit of my knowledge. So I kept my eyes open and my mouth closed. And every time I would hear something I didn't understand, I'd nod and then spend the evening figuring it out and come back the next day and do it again. So it was, it's the best thing I ever stumbled into. It's the best job in the universe. And that's how I got there. I don't encourage anyone to follow my career path because it's just way too random. But it got me there.
Was there anyone along the way that was a mentor or that encouraged you to follow these ideas, or I mean these thought that you had of pursuing something? Because you say that there was in your gene pool there was no one that kind of guided you, but along the way was there a mentor that?
I had a high school chemistry and physics teacher. He taught both those classes. That was probably the one. Although, all I can say he did was treat me just like the guys. So I was the only girl in physics classes, and that was okay. He expected the same from me as he did from the guys. And that was it. And so teachers, they can, even if they only influence one student, it can be profound, and they may not even know what they did or that they didn't do it. I actually invited him to all my launches, and he was the one. So that set me off on a path to science. I actually applied in engineering. I went to Auburn University because it was 70 miles from my house. And I applied in engineering, and I went there in the summer for the orientation. And I discovered that the curriculum was more restricted than I wanted. You just basically take engineering classes, that's it. And so I got out. I didn't even start in engineering. I went into the College of Arts and Sciences. I stayed undeclared for as long as they allow you to stay undeclared, which is 2 full years. I took biology, and it was okay. I took chemistry and found out that you have to wash dishes and pay for what you break. So the next class was physics, where you get to crash cars together, and who could not like that? So that's how I ended up there. And then after all that, I ended up teaching in an engineering school.
So for space shuttle missions. Now I can't remember. Was it the before or after some of the accidents?
It was after Challenger, and then I left NASA before Columbia.
You said that like you've told me that you would go back on a heartbeat if they called you. What was what is it that like makes you not even questioning? Yes, I would go back tomorrow. Like what is it about the experience that it was so impactful for you?
You're asking hard questions now. I think just the environment, just the fact that you're up there looking down at Earth and from a perspective that helps me realize how small we are, how powerless we are relative to the universe, the planet. Um, I remember when I was my last flight, it was a space lab flight, so I spent most of the 2 weeks inside a laboratory with no windows. But just going out on some of the last days before we came home on the flight deck where I could see out and just trying to soak it up because I was sure that was my last flight. Just trying to, this is my last time I'm going to see this ever. I need to just try to absorb the sights, the sounds, all of that.
And what are the sounds? I mean, we often talk about the sight, you know, of looking back, or some of the sites have been also looking out, right? You talk about the infinite, and apparently the colors of the stars are much more vibrant when you look out. Maybe you can share some your experience about that, but also what are the sounds when you're in space?
Primarily, I'd say fan noises, air moving around, because whether you're in a space suit or you're inside the crew module, the air has to move around. Otherwise, you create this bubble of carbon dioxide around yourself. So you have to have air circulation. So that's continuous. Um, People moving around. Occasionally, when the vernier jets shut off and the primary jets took control of our attitude control, it sounded like a howitzer. Just stuff like that. Just trying to soak it up and I want to remember this forever. But
And
you
what?
don't. You forget.
But you don't. Well, I mean, yes, it's
Well,
like
some of
anything
it I
else.
do.
Yes. The and what was the? Did you spend a lot of time also looking away from the Earth and into the? Was there a window that looks out and into the night sky as opposed to back to the?
Depends on the attitude of the orbiter, but there's generally on the flight deck you can see out, and the pilot or commander's windows you can see out. And I would love on the night passes when I had time to go up there and turn out the lights. Everybody else is down on the middeck eating, and I'd be up there with the star chart, just walking across the night sky. And the cool thing is you get to see the whole night sky in 45 minutes. And it comes to you. You don't have to wait for it to come. And I got to see southern constellations that I had never had much opportunity to see. So it was great to look out there and then looking down at the earth because you see where people live because of the lights. The coastlines are lined with lights. Rivers are lined with lights. Highways, at least in the United States, it's pretty easy to pick out the major highways in and out of some of the cities, if you know them, because people live along those routes of transportation, and that's where we put our lights.
It must be a fascinating sight, that for sure. The I heard that the colors of the stars are more vibrant when you look out from.
I don't know if I can confirm that. I don't recall that, but I do know there's just billions of them. And if you look at a place between two stars where there's nothing, if you look long enough, you will see it's not nothing. There's something there. It's just it's infinite.
And you went all the way up to the Hubble telescope and did a repair, which is higher in orbit, correct?
It's the highest the shuttle has gone, is the Hubble.
And then when you come back, the experience on the shuttle, because it's really different than a rocket or when you're in a capsule. When you come back, the transition into the atmosphere, then the you hear the noise, right? The noise of the when it's burning outside, or is it kind of a more of a plane landing? And how is the coming back to Earth?
I would say it's like a plane landing. Some of the best airline landing you've ever experienced because the pilots are really good at it. I think there might have been a little bit of buffeting at some of the higher Mach numbers, but basically it's just smooth, and you start to feel it feels like somebody's slowly cranking gravity up, but it's actually deceleration. As you're coming into thicker atmosphere, you're slowing down more, you're decelerating more. And so that's what you perceive as gravity. And so that comes on slowly. So your pencil that's floating here starts kind of drifting down. On the flight deck, it's all business. But if you're on the mid deck, there's nothing to do. I mean, you're looking at the lockers and the view never changes. So you can play with it a little bit. You can, if you close your eyes and you pitch over, you will swear somebody pulled your seat back.
Really?
Because it's your brain has learned to reinterpret signals that it gets from your inner ear, and it's really kind of a mismatch of what's going on for a while. So the only thing your brain really trusts as far as your attitude is your eyes. So if you close your eyes, it's like a whole nother world in there.
How interesting. And so what was like coming back physically, what was the thing that for you was unexpected in relearning, or the kind of differences after spending, the time in space, your body, your senses start to adapt to that environment, and now you're back. How was the transition?
It's funny. The first time, my first flight, the night before entry, Fred Gregory, who's the commander, called his two rookies up to the flight deck, and he said, "I'll tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. After we get off, we're going to walk into the medical facility at Edwards." He said, "There's a dog leg in that hallway. You're going to hit one wall or the other as you try to make that turn." I said, "Oh, Fred, that's crazy." I hit both of them. When your inner ear depends on gravity to work properly. So when you pitch over, the little otoliths trickle forward, they tickle the nerve endings, and they told your brain you did a pitch. The only way to get that same sensation in orbit is to move backwards. So by inertia, those things trickle forward. So when you first get up there, if you move backwards, your brain thinks you pitched over, but your eyes say, no, 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 that's not what you did. I think that's what causes some of the space sickness in the first day, is that nutty stuff that's going on between your brain and your eyes and your semicircular canals, and your brain just shuts down non-essential systems while it figures out what's going on. Coming back, you have to readapt to that. So your brain has figured out only to trust your eyes and not to trust what's going on here. But when you start getting, I say into gravity, but when you start feeling a force that appears to be gravity, you start sending these signals from your semicircular canals back to your brain, and it doesn't like them. It doesn't trust it. So when you get back on Earth, if you close your eyes, you'll fall over. You'll just flat fall over. And it's one of the tests the doctors would do even 30 days after flight, is tell you to close your eyes and stand on one foot. Couldn't begin to do it.
Really?
Yeah.
How interesting.
It totally depends on your eyes. And after one of the flights, we got home late at night and went home, went to bed, but I had to get up early the next day to get the kids off to school. And it was dark when the alarm went off. So I got out of bed and I turned a corner and I went into free fall, which was great. That's what floating in space is free fall. So I went into the Superman cruise position and landed absolutely flat on my face on the floor. No protected motions, no arms, elbows, knees, just boom. Oh yeah, gravity.
So no reflex, like your body, your brain had no like, oh, I'm falling, I'm gonna catch myself.
Yeah, I
You
went
went
floating in
back.
space again for that tenth of a second, however long it was.
Wow. And how long did it take before your brain snapped back into?
I think it's gradual. Like I said, there's still effects even 30 days after, but I don't normally close my eyes and stand on one foot, so it's not something that I checked very often. But they do recommend we don't drive for the first day or so, other things like that, because if you turn to check your six to make a lane change,
Yeah.
gyros just tumble. At least for
How
me.
interesting. How interesting. So understanding that reality, the biology of space, do you think, because yesterday I was having a conversation with a doctor, and his view or his opinions of space really are about the challenges of biology, right? We're not physically and biologically made for it, and he's doesn't understand how these dots are going to connect, because we're talking about total different realities. What do you think is the evolution going to be, or the technology or the solutions for the biological and the physical aspect of going to space and the difference when you come back to Earth?
Well, I do say that almost everyone fully adapts to space in 24 hours. We are very adaptable. It's just a different place. It's different stimuli, different forces, but your body is pretty adaptable. As far as long-term effects, I can't really say. I know that, they're concerned about immune system, about radiation exposure, and all kinds of stuff. Before we can send people to Mars, we need to deal with this. But you're riding a rocket to Mars. I mean, you have to fold in that probability as well. Sure, I may come back and 30 years I may get cancer, or may have to have something removed, or whatever. But there are a lot of risks, and I think you have to weigh all of them. I don't think we'll ever be, well, maybe we will be perfectly adapted. Although, if we got adapted to that environment, or we grew in that environment, we were gestated and born and grew up in that environment, maybe we couldn't come back here.
Yeah, the gravity, the bones would not be. I mean, that was something also in The Expanse where a person doesn't have the bone density or the muscles for the gravity.
But maybe then we would send athletes to one of the planets that have a higher gravity to train, and then come back here and they'd feel like they're flying.
Are you the type of person who watches a movie, space movie, or Marvel movie, and then you look at the physics of it, and you go, sorry, no, that would never happen, and then you can't watch it anymore, or you're able to put aside your brain and just be entertained?
Most of them are just entertainment. Yeah, on the movie Gravity, when I was teaching, I would use that as an example, make my students calculate the amount of delta V or propellant it would take to go to all those places. And what was it? Hubble Space Telescope and the Chinese space station, and all those other places, calculate how much it would take. It was like, and see how impossible it is. But mostly I find them entertaining.
So in that movie, it would have been impossible to navigate between those points.
It is very propulsion expensive to change the inclination of the orbit. You can go up and you can go down, and you can phase, your elliptical orbit and all that stuff. And that's not such a big deal. But to change the inclination from the International Space Station, which is 52, to Hubble, which is 28, and I don't know where the other place is, I can't remember. But that is extraordinarily energy requiring to do that. And so it was part of it was an orbital mechanics class. So they knew all the ways to calculate it, and that was one of the homework problems one time.
This is where Hollywood goes, that's a little bit too complicated. Let's just keep it simple and just make it happen.
Yeah, make it fun. I mean, although I have to say, I would never have let George Clooney go. I mean, that was the most ridiculous part of it.
Kathryn, there's the return to Earth. Like, I know that when I was younger and I started to travel, I was in high school and I took 2 years and I went to travel, and I came back, and you see the world hasn't changed, or the people are still continuing, and you feel that there's a disconnect in where you feel like you've been exposed to something different. When you came back, did you walk among the living, feeling that you were different, or there was no?
No, I was happy to be alive.
You were just happy to
Really.
be alive.
Yep. Happy to be back, happy to be alive. Get ready for the next mission.
Ready for the next mission? Did you have a ritual? Did you have something that you were craving when you came back? I said, the first thing I'm going to get a bag of chips. And
Pizza. I wanted a pizza.
pizza.
Yeah. In fact, I said that during a press conference on one of the flights, and sure enough, in the crew quarters when we got back, they had pizza for me.
Any kind of pizza? Hawaiian? Pepperoni?
Pepperoni, yeah. Veggie.
Pepperoni? One of the things about the experience that we hear a lot, because we don't think of, I mean, we think when people go up to space, there's really just the mechanic and the structure of it. But one of the experiences that people don't expect a lot is the smell, right? You walk into the space station, or you walk into these modules, the smell there's something to it. Did you feel that there's a unique smell of space?
Wow, I wonder what the space station does smell like. I left before there was a space station, so I never had that experience. But man, there have been humans living on there for over 20 years. It's probably not good.
Do you think that the experience of space, like right so far, I mean, even the people who've been chosen to go to space were engineered base. You know, there were a kind of the physical aspect of it, and then the engineering aspect of it. And when you go up to space, you're the food, everything is kind of reduced to it's a hardcore wilderness camp where nothing is really about the comfort. It's more just the necessity of what of you going to the bathroom and you eating. But the future will have to be different, right? The human experience will have to change. The food experience will have to change. Like when you look into the future, how do you see it so that it becomes more of a regular flight, as today it is, going on a plane?
Well, how much does it have to change, or how much do our expectations have to change? If you never experienced pizza, you could live without it. It would be a shame, but you could.
Yeah.
Um,
But do you think that food is going to change?
well, what I missed was crunchy things because the food was freeze dried. So, I like crunchy vegetables, but up there, broccoli au gratin was just like cheese whiz with green stuff in it. So it wasn't broccoli that you could crunch into. So it would be nice if you could get more things like that. But um, I guess I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you can live without it. Maybe you should ask that to somebody who's been up there for 6 months or more. I had 2 weeks at most, so I'm not the best person to ask about that.
No, but even within 2 weeks you can, or I mean, it's interesting because like when I did the solo wilderness expeditions, there is there's a study in where it looks at how long it takes for your body to really transition to a new environment. Like usually when, let's say you take, and I was doing immersion, wilderness immersion, the kids, usually you would want to do it for 2 weeks because for the first week and a half, your body is holding on your previous environment. It's looking into these anchor points that can give you a sense of stability and orientation. And then after that, your brain kind of switches and starts embracing that new environment, and now you start adapting. And so after 2 weeks in space, it would be interesting how your experience would have been maybe different or the same. But I guess we'll never
I
know.
don't know. Uh, That's what I said. Maybe we adapt our expectations. We don't to a different environment, whatever it is, whether it's better or worse is probably a personal thing. When I go out backpacking for a few days and come back, man, something like a Wendy's cheeseburger is the best food in the entire world. And occasionally I would cry in the shower because it felt so good. So, but that was expectations, I guess. Yeah, I knew I was coming back to that. But if I knew I wasn't coming back to that for 6 months or 2 years, maybe you don't get to that point until the very end. I think about the astronauts who are up there now that went up on Starliner, and their return has been delayed by what now, more than 25 days. Um, their expectations I guess, had to evolve along with what their return trip is. I think that's harder probably than expecting to be up there for 2 months, is to expect to be up there for 10 days and have your return flight canceled, postponed.
Yes, and I can only imagine, not only just for them, but also for their families. That must be hard. And the trying to understand the way out of it, right? It's not. It's. I mean, I mean, people are not making jokes, but people are making comments, obviously, about Boeing and about the the delivery of Starliner and the pattern of issues that have been with this program, and I think this is kind of like the cherry on the top of, and however they want to spin it, like the if it was just an anomaly and just this is one time event, but after such a pattern of series of issues with spacecraft and also the program, right? There's been a lot of critique on SLS and this old structure. Do you try not to be too judgmental on this?
Yeah, I do. I mean, because don't know any of the facts, and so I have no basis to be critical of it. Space is a tough business. You have to be cautious, and so that's what they're doing now. They're taking some major hits for it, but they're being cautious and trying to, understand as much as possible before they commit to bring them back on that vehicle. So, when we, the public, pound on them, we're actually pushing them in the direction of accepting more risk, and that's the wrong thing to do. So I try not to beat that drum. I think good people are doing the best they can, and they're being cautious.
In the next, what would be like for you, understanding the challenges of being an engineer, the big breakthroughs that needs to happen for space to be different, right? Is it energy? Do we need to find a source of energy that will dramatically change what can and can be done? Is it in material? What do you think of these big milestones that need to be accomplished for space to be different?
Well, I think we have to get the cost down for launching off the Earth, and I don't know of any other source of energy than chemical propulsion to get us from Earth to Earth orbit. Once you get in Earth orbit, you're 90% of the way energy-wise anywhere in the solar system, practically. And so you can use other types of propulsion from that point on. Ion engines and plasma engines and nuclear thermal propulsion. I mean, there's lots of options out there that I know that people are working on. What you do is you trade mass for time. They're very low thrust but high specific impulse, which means high thrust per weight engines. So you run them forever. They have a long duty cycle as opposed to chemical engines that are boom on off. So I think that's how we'll move around in the solar system. Eventually, maybe we have to have a space station or the gateway around the moon that is a place to transition from the high thrust getting off the Earth propulsion to the lower thrust, higher specific impulse move around the solar system. I mean, it's like transporting supplies to the Antarctic station. There are a number of different transportation modalities that are involved in that, depending on which one is most efficient in the area. So you fly things to wherever the breaking off point is, and then you put it on a ship and it goes there, and then it gets on something else to go to the interior. So I think that we'll eventually get to something like that to be our transportation system around the solar system.
And if we go back to what we were talking earlier about the past, right? History. If we look at what people thought was feasible, again, the 1500s, right? If you had to go from Paris to London, Paris to North America, you would have to get on a horse, and then you would have to get on the ship, sail across. It would take months and months, and now we get on the plane, and then we are there 6 hours later. Like if you go back into that time and you would tell people, listen, this is what's going to happen in the future, they would not even being able to put the dots together. They would be like, this is impossible. Witchcraft sends you to jail. You're crazy. But today, today it is the most simplest thing. So, and we have to look into the future in that same kind of reality. So
even in the shorter term, in the more human life term, I have an uncle who died several years ago. But he remembered traveling across Arkansas in a covered wagon as a child, and then he watched me launch twice on the Space Shuttle. So his lifetime encompassed from basically I'm stretching a little bit, but the Wright brothers to the International Space Station. And my lifetime is, Sputnik to, I hope, seeing people walk on Mars. I mean, that's just a single lifetime. Um, you think about 3 or 4 or 5 lifetimes, it's beyond my imagination to know, you know, what would what would happen. We moved into this house I lived in 1996, family of 5, and it was wired for 5 phone lines. I thought, wow, that's cool. Someday we'll all have our own phone number that will follow us from birth to the grave. So I had it right, but I had the wrong technology. We do have
Incredible.
our own phone number that follows us our lifetime, but it's not wired to a wall.
Incredible. Kathryn, you've really interesting upbringing, journey. Space was kind of never in the cards for you. You figure it out. I think that you believed in what you could do for yourself, even if you were not prepared for it. So I'm pretty sure now you're a teacher. You've been sharing that wisdom. But what would be Kathryn's 3 words of wisdom?
Wow. Did I mention that all human laws and regulations can be argued? So if I can change that from words to thoughts, um, people, we always think that, wisdom comes with age. I have to tell you, I thought I'd be so much smarter when I got here. So, I'd rather couch this in terms of advice, and that comes from advising, 18, 19, and 20-year-olds for 20 years or something like that. But, first I'd say, and did say, to keep your options open. And as a student, that means take the hardest classes, take the routes that will eventually give you more choices at the end. I really hated to hear, I don't need to know this, I don't need to learn this, because you don't know what you're going to need to learn. You have no idea where your career is going to take you or what careers will be invented, in the time. So that's one. Second, I'd say when you see a great opportunity, grab it. Don't be afraid to grab it. And lastly, always told students that make decisions, because they can be overwhelmed with choices. Make decisions based on the best information you have at the time, and don't ever look back. If it takes you to a place you don't want to go, then change it. Change course, but it's of no value to look backwards once you've made a decision. It's just keep moving forward. So that's what I would send them off with. And some of them have actually done very well, despite my mentoring. And one last thing, if I can say this, is that, I think when we start saying the world's going to hell in a handbasket and all that stuff, we're old. We're really old. That's what old people do. And I don't want to do that. And maybe that's because I got a chance to work with young people for 20 years. They are as motivated, as bright, as hardworking as any generation before them. They are, in fact, more entrepreneurial than I would say my generation was. And maybe that's because some of them have a safety net. They can always go live in mom's basement, which for me and for other first generation students, that wasn't a choice. It was finish up and get out. So I am very optimistic about turning the world over to them. Say, okay, kids, we've screwed it up. Fix it. It's your turn. So, I look forward to seeing what they're going to do.
It's not being naive, but it's understanding what we can achieve as we figure things out. And, you were saying make decisions and don't look back, because we do take decisions and do things with the best hope. We have life is not black and white, right? It's a really, as we move forward, we have to navigate these uncharted waters, having to understand that innovations and mistakes are almost both of the same until you have the hindsight to look back and say, well, that worked and then that didn't work. And then sometimes, you get 2 teams are going to do exactly the same thing, and then one succeeds and then the other one fails. So it's a really complicated world to move forward to. So when we judge the past in the same way that we are judging the past today, like, oh my God, how awful, why would you make those decisions? The reality is, if we judge the past like this, then we have to accept to be judged by the future in the same way. And so we make decisions with, the knowledge available, with priorities, with also our her sense of priorities. Sometimes it's like, even with the knowledge, the priorities, we would like to do this, but it's much more complicated. So, and then, like, if we end with, again, a little bit of history, North America was, when Europe started to go in ocean exploration, North America was not the intended goal. It was a crust. It was something else. It was more. So it's, you start with an idea, with a carrot that you go after, but in the process you get to discover something else that often has more value than what you started with. And so, Kathryn, always fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you for making it fun.
Yeah. It takes two to tango. It's always a conversation. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But if it works, it's a dance. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I look forward for next time together.
Yeah, I hope so.
Excellent. Until then, wishing you a wonderful day, Kathryn. Always a
Thank
pleasure.
you. You too.